Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So hello everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. As usual, I am your host and with me today is Luigi Testa. Now, Luigi is the CFO of LinkSquares and we're going to talk today about his journey both before and after LinkSquares in terms of how he's led his organization to a fabulous growth story. So welcome, Luigi. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thanks, Hannah. Really happy to be here and excited to have the conversation.
Yes, well, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up at LinkSquares?
I'll give you the short version of the story. So I started my career working in venture in the Boston area. Did that for a handful of years and been working for private equity-backed and venture-backed companies since I left venture. LinkSquares, I met the two founders a long time ago when they started the business in 2016. They started in the back of a coffee shop in Boston. And I thought the idea was awesome. Selling contract management software to general counsel so they can understand what's inside their contracts was kind of where they started. And, they were really small and they barely had any revenue. I kept in touch with them over the years. And, as they started to, really prove themselves in the market, they were working on a Series A fundraise. I helped them do that as an advisor. And then shortly after that, jumped on as a CFO right at the beginning of 2020. And prior to that, I built and ran an M&A platform for a private equity-backed software company. I've always been in B2B software, so really excited that I got to join the business when they were about 2 million in revenue, and we've gone well beyond that. So it's been a great story and a great ride, and the most important part is having a lot of fun doing it too.
Absolutely. That's an interesting sort of, entry point in, first of all, helping them with their Series A and then jumping across. So tell me a little bit about how you found that transition into CFO, coming from a non-traditional finance background.
Yeah, so I think, there's sort of two paths. The most common path for a CFO to get into a business is you grow up in the accounting world working for one of the big four firms. And at a certain point, you say, I want to go work for one of these companies that I'm doing audits on. And that's a very common path. I think, what's shifting now is the more strategic CFO that companies are looking for, especially companies that are growing and companies that are trying to evolve themselves constantly. And that's more my skill set. So it's somebody that is not just going to be involved in the accounting and day-to-day finance, but somebody that understands, the entire picture of the business and how to grow and how to scale it, and also understand the dynamics of fundraising and markets, so you can really optimize how you're building value in the business. I think, coming from an accounting background, it's a little bit more challenging to build enterprise value versus coming from a background of strategic finance, M&A and venture and private equity. So it's not the normal path, but I think for me and for this company, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Doing what I do here, I've seen more of those more unusual paths into CFO, particularly starting to appear. So, and was it something that you were always interested in, or was it just the circumstances that you were in with that particular company?
No, I'd say probably 2 or 3 companies ago that I worked at, I said I want to try to go for the CFO role, and I've had some really great mentors, CFOs that I've worked for that knew that's exactly what I wanted to do, and they brought me into a lot of things and kind of mentored me along the way, as well as folks in the investment community that have been mentoring me to get me to the spot that I wanted to be. So this is my first CFO role. I've been doing it since 2020. And I'd say, certainly without having a great network, it would be a lot harder to get to the seat.
Absolutely. And you talked about obviously leveraging your network, but is there any other advice you would give those that are perhaps not from a traditional accounting background looking to jump into that CFO role? How did you get into a position where you were able to offer the skill set that you would be considered for that role?
It's really understanding the problems of the business and how to deal with them, because a lot of them are not financial problems or accounting problems. They're problems around growth and scale. So that's kind of one thing. And I'm a first time CFO. I don't know everything. And if I've done this, 10 more times as a CFO, I'm still not going to know everything. So, the power of the network is really, being able to call somebody and say, hey, how did you do this when this happened to you? Right. And not trying to reinvent everything from scratch every single time. Because, being a B2B software company, there's thousands of them in the universe, and there's a lot of the problems that we all face are the same problems. So somebody's probably solved some of these issues that I'm, with scaling and growing headcount, you name it, all the things that happen in a startup, somebody solved those issues at some point in time, many times over. So, finding the right mentor, the right person in your network to kind of help guide you along. And it's not just, it's not one person. It's multiple people that can help along the way. Whereas I think if you're trying to solve it in a bubble and just grow up to be the expert on your own, it becomes a lot more challenging. And I think, overall, it gives you great perspective on how you could run any business, not just a software business.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned funding a few times. So talk to us a little bit about how did you see a difference in going through that Series A funding to make them making that shift to, I think it was a Series C was the latest round that you guys went through?
Sure. Yeah. So Series A, I would say as you go further up the alphabet, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but the fundamentals on which investors are underwriting their investment are a lot different. So in the very early days, seed and Series A, they're looking at the team, they're looking at the idea, and they're looking at the market and saying, do we think we want to make a bet on this? Do we think we want to take a chance on this? And it's mostly about, the market's there, but it's really about, do the people that are running this company, the people that started this company, do we believe in them? Because there's probably a good chance they're going to have to pivot at some point and do something completely different. Things never go according to plan. So that, a Series A seed round is really just a bet, and who knows what's going to happen, right? A lot of them, don't actually pan out. As you go along, to later rounds of funding, you have financials, you have results, you have momentum that you've built up in the market. And I think in a lot of cases, investors, for the most part, are looking at businesses one way, and that's looking at it, first by, what is the spreadsheet saying? How are the results? How is it tracking relative to other companies of its size and industry? And then they go to, does this management team have the capability to pull off, the next 3 to 4 years and build value in the business? So it kind of shifts from being a bet and being more artistic, and just, kind of picking one that you think is great, to being much more scientific, when you get to the later stages, because you're effectively solving a math problem and trying to understand if all these things happen, what's the probability of success? But you have data to drive that decision. Whereas before, when you're sub $2 million of revenue, and, few years of operating, you don't have a lot of data to suggest this could work or it won't work.
And you mentioned obviously at those early stages, it's very much about do you have confidence in the team that's there? So, having been on, I guess, the advisory side of the fence, as well as the people in a CFO now in a business, what do you think people are looking for in that team? What are the key components that they're after?
I mean, there's many different components, and I think being, very academic and smart is probably on the kind of lower end of those attributes. It's I think first and foremost is the ability to execute and the ability to pivot when things don't go your way. And you almost need to find a founder that's a little bit crazy and is willing to take some risk, especially early on, to build the kind of core part of the business. And then as the business grows, you sort of shift from I'm taking bets, I'm taking more risk to okay, I can now take calculated risks because I know what I'm doing. So that's how I really view a team. And then kind of the second piece of that is as you observe how a team operates, you're observing, how they interact, how they work with each other. Is this a team that I could see working together well, for the next, call it, I say 3 to 4 years, because generally that's when every time you raise a round of financing, it's 2 to 3, call it 4 years. Does this team have what it takes to do that? So I think those are the kind of big ones if I'm an investor looking at a business that I would focus on. And it's an automatic that if you're looking at a business that the market is there and it's alive and it's growing, and then the other sort of important things that I mentioned are the things you really want to hone in on and evaluate. And those are a lot harder. And every investor has a different way to evaluate them. Once they go through the financials and say, okay, I'm looking at benchmarks and this company is above the benchmarks in these areas, so I can pass go on that and move on to the more important things.
And so tell us a little bit about the latest funding round with LinkSquares. I think I read in the briefing that it was quite a fast round compared to most. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a fast round and it came together really quickly. We were at the beginning of 2022 now. It feels like it was ages ago. And this is right before, the economy started to kind of turn south and things started to drop as far as investments. We're at the beginning of 2022. We're always talking to investors and checking in with new investors and our existing investors. And that's how you build relationships. You certainly want to understand who you're going to be, married to for the next handful of years. So we regularly talk to investors, give them updates on the business, understand how they're thinking about the market. That gives us good perspective on how we should operate the business. And we were started having those conversations very, very late in 2021, early 2022, and a handful of investors put their hand up and said, "I think you have a great business. We'd love to. I know you're not looking for cash right now, but we would love to see if you're interested in a round of financing. We could put something together." So with that, we found a few more of these investors that had seemed like they were pretty interested. We ran a quick and small process. We got a handful of term sheets, and based on that, we did our diligence with these different investors, and it was two that we picked for the Series C in just about 60 days, and kind of the rest is history. So we were really fortunate that we were kind of more opportunistically able to close a round of financing. We didn't need the cash at the time, but it worked out well, just kind of given what's happened in the markets over the last couple of years.
So you talked a lot about obviously going through that due diligence process. For those perhaps who haven't been through a funding round, what does that look like at Series C? What are the key sort of steps that you would normally go through?
Yeah, I think I've answered this question a few different times for different folks, and the best way to think about it is don't prepare for the Series C when you're at the Series C. Because if you do that, you're going to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off. You're preparing every day for it. And that means, keeping everything clean, from a financial perspective, understanding your metrics really well, being able to understand your metrics well is one thing, but being able to communicate how the business is operating and how those metrics impact the business, what the key drivers are, is really, really important. So we're always talking to investors, and we're always kind of thinking about these different drivers. So when you get to an event, and this is really quick, I was talking with our CEO one day and said we should start a mini process. People are interested, so we just spun a data room up really quickly, in a couple of days, and it's all the basic things you would expect, financials, customer list, so on and so forth. But we had all that ready at hand, and it was clean and it was ready to go. And you have to just consistently be disciplined about keeping tabs on that stuff and making sure you understand it, and making sure it makes sense. And if it starts to go off track, putting it back on track. So when you get to a situation like this, it is just really easy to put all that due diligence material forward. And I think it gives the prospective investor a lot of confidence that if you're able just to produce that quickly, you're doing a lot of things right. If I'm looking at a business and a company can't provide clean financials quickly, it makes you wonder what else is not going well there.
So what does that, like sort of pre-Series C checklist of things to always have available on hand look like? What are the key things that you need to have ready at any time?
Yeah, so from a tactical standpoint, it's really your audited financials, your financials dating back, call it 3 or 4 years, the key metrics that you look at to run the business, and how have they trended over the last handful of years, your customer list, and then any sort of industry or market analysis that you've done to explain why you exist. Why do you exist? And then, of course, there's a pitch deck that's kind of a combination of all those things that summarizes it. But, why do you exist? And what is the next big thing that you're going to do that justifies why you need this funding? Because if you're just going to take funding and do everything you're doing the exact same way, it doesn't really make much sense to do it. You're taking on funding to do something much bigger than you're doing today.
Understood. So that's an interesting perspective in terms of sort of be ready nice and early. On the flip side, when you were looking for investors, what made you decide to go down the route with? You said you chose 2. What was it that you were looking for in that, in your choice of investors for LinkSquares?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's not always about, a lot of people say you want to get the best, deal from a financial perspective. It's not necessarily always about the best financial deal. It's you're going to be with these people for at least 3 to 4 years before they exit. In many cases, longer than that. So it's about understanding how they work with their existing portfolio companies, how those companies have performed, what sort of sectors they invest in, how they do it, what style of investing manage they do. Are they very hands-on where they want to put their own playbook in the business, or are they more passive where they they trust the management team to run the business? So those are all the things that we think about when we talk to investors. And you're also thinking about what's my next step after this. So if I fast forward 3 to 4 years, where does the business need to be, and can these investors help us get there? And kind of based on that, assuming the financial terms are what they need to be, that's how I would go about selecting investors, because there's a lot of capital out there. I mean, we think about it as water. It's a commodity. You can have Evian, you can have Dasani, you can open up the tap and the same thing comes out. So you should be selective in who you want to work with, because I think it really is important as you think about how you want to build your business. And for a lot of founders, like, their business is their identity. It's really important. It's like one of their babies.
No, it is. And I guess that's the bit, like you say, is just trying to find the right match in terms of the right investors that suit your style as well. And I guess, when you're looking ahead now, having gotten that Series C piece, how are you approaching sort of your next? You mentioned there's obviously a 3 to 4 year cycle. What does next look like for you as a team?
Yeah, next that's a very loaded question. Next is, if you're raising venture capital, next is always, how do you double and triple and quadruple the amount of revenue you have? So that's like, because ultimately you're taking an investment so you can generate more value in the business. Okay, that's like an obvious thing. Well, how are you going to do it? So what's next for us? It's really going beyond what we've already built from a product standpoint, and proving the power of the platform. We came out with a contract management solution that allows customers to see what's inside their contracts without actually reading them, which is really helpful when you have 20,000 contracts and somebody asks you for a few key data points. Otherwise, you'd have to go and read them all. But beyond that, there's many other things you could do to make in-house lawyers' lives a lot easier. And that's what we're doing. We're finding out what are all their pain points and kind of solving them in order of priority. And, it's great to build a business and, take it, into multiples of millions on one key product. I think for software and for SaaS, the ability to demonstrate the power of the platform, which effectively means you can build multiple products and you can get your existing customers and new customers to buy multiple products from you. That's where you can really start building a ton of value in the business. So that's how we think about the world. We have thousands of customers. What else? How can we continue to make their lives a lot easier and continue to delight them? And effectively, what we do is we allow them to take out the more tactical work that they are doing, like reading contracts, and save some time so they can focus on the really important things to help them actually run their business. So that's what we're focused on in the long term, is how do we make legal teams more effective, because we want to allow them to focus on strategic work, not just tactical work. So we have a series of products that we continue to introduce. Of course, we started as an AI company many years ago before AI was cool. And now we're on to doing Gen AI things and other things like that. That's a lot of companies just are doing that to check the box. But we're continuing to build products thinking about that, and selling outside of legal teams as well.
And we were talking a bit about going into that funding round. Obviously, you were on the other side during that funding round. You've been an advisor on one side and then actually been the CFO in the company that's going for that funding round. Was there anything that surprised you as you went through it on the other side?
I think there's always surprises. You think things are going great, and then you get hit over the head with a baseball bat. That happens a lot of times. So I think you going through these fundraisers, I think not being surprised when things happen that are very unexpected and just figuring them out and being able to continue on. Because that same thing with just running the business in general. There's tons of things that happen that just come out of the blue that you didn't expect, and there's no way to tell that would happen. So it's really your ability to be resilient and just to work through those problems. And I think all problems are solvable. So it's just how do you maintain kind of a calm state and break the problem down and solve it.
So I always find it really hard to explain to people why they should choose ITAS as their financial transformation or Sage partner. So rather than me tell you how awesome we are, I'm going to let our customers do it.
So we decided to go with ITAS because when we were looking for a partner, we felt that they not only took the time to understand our business and they knew the needs of everyone on the team or everyone that would be using the system, but they also were very transparent in kind of what they could do, what they couldn't do. And prior to having us, sign anything or make any agreements, they held meetings with us to walk them through our processes and our business so that they really understood everything that would need to be done and give us realistic timelines as well. And another thing was, because we were so new and we didn't have a current system going, we were looking for something that we could implement rather quickly, but also do it correctly. And we felt that ITAS would be able to achieve both of those in terms of, understanding our business and implementing it how we wanted it, but also doing it in our rather quick timeline.
And over the years, have you seen consistent problems that come up fairly regularly? When you've been working, from either side, is there sort of a pattern or a trend around things that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say I would call it's a problem, but it's a good problem to have. I think and I've been working with venture-backed companies and private equity-backed companies for quite a long time now. The consistent problem is, and LinkSquares, since I joined, has grown over 100%, many years in a row. I mean, last year was a little bit different because the economy was in a funky state. But when you're growing that fast, it's very hard to keep up with keeping the business updated and being on the latest systems and having the latest processes. And you continually bring on new customers, new logos. So making sure that you're evolving your processes, especially at the very early stages, is really hard to do because you're like, I want to grow my revenue. I can't think about processes. And if you're a scrappy startup, and this is kind of goes to, we started the conversation talking about scrappy startup to, growth company. This is like truly the evolution of a startup, is being able to shift from that. I'm doing everything. I'm the person with many hats on to, I'm going to make sure we focus on all these areas and take care of all these things. So I would say, during a fundraise, going through diligence, you start to see where some of the cracks are in processes, in scalability, and you realize, okay, if I'm doing certain things the way I did them a year ago, it's not going to work in the long term. I need to build a better mousetrap. And we spent a lot of time trying to invest our time and money and in technology ahead of the curve so that things don't break, but they always do. You're growing, and like the unexpected happens. So I'd say that's sort of the biggest things that come up, during diligence that you see as problematic. But it's a good thing because there's so much growth that you have to devote it to building the company, and then you fix things that the growth effectively breaks. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit of a long-winded answer.
No, it's actually a really good one. And I do have this conversation with companies a lot, is you almost want to invest in making things automated and streamlined before you need them to be automated and streamlined. Because then you have to then deal with the after effects of them not being that way for a while. So it's really interesting to hear it alongside that due diligence piece, because I guess when you're in that sort of that mayhem of due diligence, you're getting bombarded with queries and questions, and if, like you say, your processes aren't as strong as they needed to be or should be for scale, then
Sure.
You're going to find that out pretty quickly.
Right. And there's ways to avoid that. We used a third party that conducted a growth assessment on the business, and went through an easy list of all the things that you should do to quote unquote be scalable. And there's some things that we're still working on the list. It goes all the way up to, if you're and they compare you to a public company. So there's things on that list that we don't need to do today that are on the list, and they're going to get done at some point. But we prioritize that list, and we're continuing to work through it just to avoid situations where we grew too fast and we didn't take care of X, Y, and Z, and now we have to go clean up a big mess, and that actually gets in the way of growing faster in the future. So it's kind of you don't want to have too much debt on the side of not scaling the operational part of the business because you're growing the top line so fast.
And that's an interesting piece. So let's just switch the conversation perhaps from, financing and investment through to sort of growing and scaling. So, when you learning what you've learned over the years, and particularly with the growth story that LinkSquares has, what has changed in terms of your perspective on what it takes to scale and to grow fast?
I mean, so there's a few different factors. One is the size and stage of the company, and I think the second is the outside world, the economy, the macro sentiment, all that kind of stuff. I would say if you look back to say 2021, 2022, and this has probably been said a million times, growth at all costs was very much in fashion. If you can generate 200-300% growth in a year, we don't, we as an investor, we don't care. We just want to see that growth. That's great. We're going to reward you. And now if you have that same company that is doing that, and by the way, it's a lot harder to grow that much. So even if you put, all the money in the world into a business, poor unit economics are haunting companies because it just was not a muscle that a lot of companies had to flex, especially earlier stage ones. because the market and the investors didn't demand it. There was so much capital before that investors really, cared about. I want to invest in the fastest growing business, so that's going to, have the revenue grow, as quickly as possible, because that's what businesses are being valued on. And now the shift is, and I would say, companies at many stages, the shift is, I want to invest in a company that has good growth, not, exceptionally crazy growth with a lot of burn. But I also really value strong unit economics and good, sales metrics that are under control. Because at the end of the day, like, where are we trying to get to? Any business, we're trying to get to a place where we're generating revenue, we're generating cash flow, we're generating a profit. And if you are out of control and you have poor unit economics, it's going to be really hard to do that.
No, absolutely. And what are typically, obviously, as a SaaS company, what are the core unit economics that you look at and you think about? And does that change from a Series A to a Series C? Are investors looking at different things as they get up that stage?
Sure. So yeah, that's a two-part question. So I'll take it in two different parts. I'll address the by stage part one first. The way that I've thought about it is, in the early days, this might contradict what I said a second ago, but just hang on for a second, follow it with me. In the early days, your metric is how much can you grow? Like, it's just really one metric. How much can you grow and keep your burn cash under a reasonable amount? And the reason I say that is, you don't have a ton of cash to burn. Like, you're not doing a $200 million round of financing when you're, $500,000 revenue company. So how fast can you grow? You fast forward another couple of years to a later stage round of financing. You're still caring about revenue, but then you're adding new metrics on. So there's revenue retention, there's expansion. How much can you retain of your revenue, and how much can you grow your existing revenue based on the customers you have? Those are some things. Burn obviously is an important one. And so every successive financing, you're effectively adding more metrics that you need to be responsible for and keep track of and balance. And it makes it hard. You're adding more variables to the equation that you need to balance. So if you adjust one, it might break another one. So you need to figure out how you can, like, effectively balance them well, so you have a healthy financial profile as you kind of continue to build a business. And it's hard because certain things can throw that off. If you want to grow sales a lot, well, guess what? You need to hire a bunch of account executives. You need to invest a bunch in marketing ahead of that revenue coming in. So that's going to degrade your metrics. So how do you do that in a way that you don't degrade them too much where the business doesn't look great? So yeah, earlier stages, it's a little bit easier as far as the metrics, because there's less things to care about. You're just caring about, can I survive and build my revenue base? And then, you fast forward to where we are now, there's at least half a dozen metrics that we look at on a very regular basis and that we care about. Revenue growth, our CAC payback, as we measure our sales efficiency, our burn and our burn ratio is the way we measure, like, overall in the business, are we doing a good job of managing our cash and continuing to grow the business? So and I think a huge mistake is also, if you're looking at too many metrics, then it's not super meaningful. So you need to really focus on the right ones, and they're not always the same for every company, even if it's a SaaS company.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting to understand. And I guess then to talk about from a second perspective, like, in terms of, you talked about it not being SaaS specific. Are unit economics something that all businesses should be looking at, regardless of whether they're SaaS or not?
Yeah, I mean, every business should be looking at the unit economics. The longer you take to look at those and know how you can influence and improve them, the longer it's going to take for you to get to your end goal, which is to be profitable, or to sell the company, or to go to public. Whatever that is, it's a really important factor. And it goes back to talking about being more scientific with how you run the business versus being more artistic. In the early days, it's all about the art. Does this stick to the wall? Does this make sense? Can we make a bet here and hopefully it'll generate multiples? As you get further along down the curve, it's much more about being calculated and scientific.
Absolutely. And I guess, so talking about that sort of that growth story, how did you build a finance function that could scale with the business on its journey? What are some of the things that you thought about as you were growing to find, I guess, the balance between process and control, but also not hampering growth? How did you find the balance?
It's a great question. And so when I started, it was myself and one other person on the finance team, and that worked really well for a couple of years. And I wasn't just doing finance; we were doing HR, we were doing legal, we were doing IT, we were packing up boxes to move our offices. So we're doing a little bit of everything. And there's just absolutely no way if we had stayed like that, but we would, I would be successful as a CFO or as a finance team, because it's just you can't do everything. And as you scale in size, you realize, what are the things that you're good at, what are the things that you're probably better off hiring a subject matter expert in to run and to do. And I think about finance as sort of a three-pronged group. The first one is accounting, so making sure people get paid, making sure that your books are clean. The core accounting function, producing a clean audit. So finding somebody that's an expert to run that, ideally from a larger company, which is what we have, because I know that that person can scale into the role, and I'm not looking for a first timer either. I want somebody that's been there and done that. And ultimately, our ambitions go as high as becoming a public company. The other part of the second sort of prong is um, looking at FP&A, financial planning and analysis, and finding a really strong leader, for that function of the business. And I ran that for many years here, because there was nobody else that could do it, and I've done that at other companies for many years. In that part of the business, like figuring out how that scales, finding somebody that is better at FP&A than me to run that part of the function. And then the last one is strategic finance. And it's kind of like a blanket word, strategic. The way that I think about it is it's effectively a Swiss Army knife for the business, or, an easy way to understand it is a management consultant for the business. And the way that we use that function is, as we're growing and scaling, I talked about this earlier, things are breaking, processes need to be evolved or even created. And this is a function that does exactly that across the entire business. We look at how we're collecting from customers. Are we spending too much time, sending onesie, twosie emails to our customers to collect? Is there a way to do that with very little human intervention? How are we discounting? Is there a process for it? So this is a function that truly identifies ways to improve operational efficiency and things that we're doing right now that won't scale, and it fixes them. So those are the three areas that I focus on, from like a finance group perspective. But I would say, like the finance group in running the finances of the company is a very small part of the CFO role. It's much bigger. Like, you're effectively the right hand person to the CEO, and you should have a good command on how the rest of the business operates and what are the drivers that influence it.
So I guess just to wrap up that's an interesting, and you landed on a last point, and I'm just gonna dig into that about being that sort of right hand to the CEO. What does that look like to you? What does being a good right hand man mean for you in your CFO role?
So obviously keeping the trains running on time, which is having the finance part of the equation under control. The other piece of it is dealing with and working through and partnering externally in the business. So working with the banks, working with investors, getting a good pulse in the market, making sure that we have a good kind of financial brand from an investor perspective. You're being a partner of the CEO to do that. And the second piece of that is internal. So being a great business partner. And at the end of the day, the finance group is a service provider. So we're providing services to the entire company, and even, outside the company. So making sure that, the person that's running our sales organization, they have everything they need to make decisions. And a lot of that is they have data, but do they have analysis and takeaways and insights into how their part of the business is working so they can run it effectively. That I think is a really important part of the role. Even more important than just like running the finance function, because the finance function is very important. But if you can't run the rest of your business smoothly and sell and get investors to be interested in the business, then you don't actually have a business.
No, 100%. And I guess final thoughts then, because we've talked a lot about scale in this conversation. What are your top tips for building a finance team that can scale? And what is it? I guess what are the attributes that you look for in in the employees that you take on that suit that sort of rapid growth journey?
It's a good question. Take a second and pause and think. It first starts with understanding, or at least trying to understand, what you think the needs of the business will be in a couple of years, and it building ahead of that. And it's really hard because things change really quickly, right? And it starts with putting the right people in place that can scale with the business and are not going to get outgrown by the business in a couple of years. So getting the right people in the business to effectively run it, or in the finance to effectively run it, and then the second piece that is making sure that you're keeping up with how the business is scaling, and that goes back to the processes and the systems. And it's really, I think about it as being very, very disciplined with how you're like effectively running the business. And if you think about exercise, right? If I decide that I don't like the way I look and I want to go change my body, I'm not going to go to the gym for a week and then stop going, right? You got to just, if you just do it every day and you're disciplined about it, you have a routine, that has a true impact. And the other important piece of that is you need to continually evolve your routine. And I don't think we need to try to solve huge problems all at once. I think doing things incrementally and improving them, like call it 1%, 2%, 5% at a time, actually has a bigger impact over the course of a year versus trying to take a huge problem and fix it, right? So if I'm continually like improving little parts of the business incrementally, and I look back on the year, I can say, oh, actually, all those 1%, 2%, 3%, so that adds up to like, 150%, whatever the number is. So trying to get a little bit better and get small wins on the board that add up to something big, and what I would say is transformational over a period of time.
No, I like that. That's really great. Good habits. And that's one of my, there's a brilliant book around habits. But talking of books, we're going to finish on your recommendation. So what book would you recommend for any new or aspiring CFO to read? What's on your bookshelf?
So I'm trying to read more than I have in the past. It's sort of a newer goal of mine, and just improve my understanding of how to run and scale a business, not just in technology, but just generally. And I went to business school, and you kind of do all the case studies and read all the books. But I'm interested in it, first of all, and second of all, I think it's really important for where we're going. So the book that I'm actually reading right now that I like a lot, it's a pretty quick read, is called The 12-Week Year, and it's effective. It kind of pulls on the vein of discipline. It's effectively explaining to you or teaching you how you can operate in 90-day periods and set specific goals. And it's all about being able to execute on what you say you're going to execute on and not being distracted. And at the end of the day, I really think about how can we be successful, and it's being really focused on the things that matter, and not a lot of things, but a few things that matter. And then the second is being able to execute on them. That's a lot of what this book talks about, which I'm pretty into.
Yeah, and I can second that. I love that. It's one of my favorite books, actually. It's a great, and then some of the templates and things that sit in it are really interesting. So thank you so much, Luigi, for joining me on the show today. It's been
Yeah.
so great to talk to you. And
Yeah.
if people want to learn more about yourself or about LinkSquares, where's the best place to find you?
LinkSquares.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Luigi Testa that works at LinkSquares.
Well, thank you so much for that. And if you do want to follow those links, don't forget, guys, as usual, we put the links to the book recommendations and, of course, the websites and social profiles in the show notes. So thank you so much, Luigi, for joining me on the show today. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you have questions, thoughts on the content today, you've enjoyed it, then please leave us a review, give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, Luigi, and we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.
I had a great time.
Thanks, Luigi.
Bye-bye.
Hey Google, what's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.